If you're just as smart as everybody else, and you work just as hard as everybody else, you're just as average.
This is Philip Su, the engineer who climbed Microsoft's ranks at warp speed, earning 8 promotions in 8 years.
When I started my career, I had a sleeping bag in my office in Microsoft.
He then moved to Meta, where he achieved the rare E9 Distinguished Engineer level. But what he did next was unheard of.
I moved from an IC9 to an IC7, fully supportive of that move because I took a much smaller scope job.
After helping build OpenAI, he came away with a warning.
So you think major disruption is coming to the world due to AI? Which jobs are safe and which jobs are not safe?
If even the world's best AI researchers are regularly and often surprised by this thing, how well can the average lay journalist writing for Business Week guess these jobs are safe? I think all of that is misguided. I am shocked we are not all collectively WTFing, what is actually going on?
So I guess what jobs are safe in your worldview? Today I'm speaking with Philip Su. Philip, you have said before that, trying to speed run to your terminal level, right? So basically, terminal level is defined as this is where you sort of cap out in terms of your capability or your ability to handle scope. Speed running to your terminal level is sort of like a dog chasing the car. It doesn't know what to do when it actually catches the car.
Yeah.
Can you get into that?
So let's say you join Meta, where straight out of college, you might be what they call an IC3, a level 3, an E3. The pinnacle you can get to as a developer there is Distinguished Engineer, IC9. That's 6 levels. You have a 45-year career ahead of you when you graduate college at 22, okay? So smeared across that, you should expect on average to be promoted once every 7 years would be reasonable, okay? Most young people you tell that to, they're like, no, I want to be an IC5 within 2 years of graduation. And I say, okay, fine. Let's suppose you speedrun it and you get to E6 within 3 years of graduation, which would be exceptionally good performance. Well, now you've earned yourself 3 remaining promotions for the duration of your life. From age 26 to age 66, you have 3 promotions and you can choose when to put them, okay? But basically once every 12 years, year of the rabbit, when it comes around again, you are welcome to get promoted again. Right?
Yeah.
Most people, when you put numbers like that out to them, they somehow have never thought this through. You know what I mean? It's genuinely shocking to them when you say you're an E6 now. How many levels does the universe have? Right? And then you chop it up by the number of years you want to work. That's just how the math works, right? So when people want to speed run, I often say, I forgot if it was Will Smith or someone else said, rising to fame feels great. Being famous feels all right. Coming down feels terrible, right? I think similarly, you want your life to have a sense of progress. If you ate up 3 out of your 6 possible lifelong promotions in the first 3 years out of college, you're going to have a very hard time the next 40 years, feeling like things are progressing, I'm not telling people to slow roll it. I'm not saying deliberately smear it out so that you get your first promotion 6 years in. All I mean is this huge rush to get somewhere. What do you think happens when you're there? What do you want to happen there? And do you want it to be like that for 20 plus years? Are you happy for it to be like that 20 plus years? If the answer is no, save a little bit of motion and progress.
They could just do what you did. You got to E9 and then you would went back down E7.
Yeah, totally. And my advice to my own younger self is, what was the big rush? My advice to my younger self would have been, surprise, one day you would be happy to go back, to go backwards because you love the work. So why stress about when am I going to get there? When am I going to get there? If you now know, you would happily go back, right?
I think that's fine. And I agree with you, but it's just the dog's chasing the car because it wants to chase the car.
Right. Good point.
If I were to interrogate my dogs, it'd be well, because it needs chasing.
Absolutely.
And so if you're going to do it, it should still try to catch the car.
Yes, I agree. If you are super enthused about your career and you have priorities straight in your life, such that you're not going to regret sacrifices you make to speedrun it, then I feel by all means, go full speed ahead.
Yeah.
Just realize once you get there, I hope you have a plan for what to do next. Because many people who chase that car, it is thrilling when you chase it. But like the dog who caught the car, the problem is many people don't have a plan 2 after that. And then you discover all of a sudden a complete loss of purpose. You know what I mean? That's what I experienced myself when I got promoted relatively early, is I soon realized like, oh, but now I've gotten the thing I wanted. What am I going to do next, right? If you're the type of ultra ambitious person where there's always a bigger thing and you're actually not the type of dissatisfied person for which that means you're never happy, but you're the type of happy person that there's always something bigger to look forward to, then I feel like, yeah, absolutely. Like speed run as fast as you can because you'll latch onto something else. I am just not that type of person. I was in a big rush because I thought, oh, that sounds like a big job. I'd love a big job. I'd love to feel important. Let me get there, with no thought to like, what is the nature of a level 9 engineer's job on a day-to-day basis, right? What are the types of politics you have to deal with? How much are you coding, versus like, are the expectations that you basically lead 200 engineers architecture and like make sure everybody is aligned toward the company goals for the half and blah, blah, right? Like how much of the substance of your day? Annie Dillard said, how we spend our days is of course how we spend our lives. But people don't seem to think that. Like literally what you do with your everyday, that is how you spend your life, And I decided like for myself, like the whittling is what I like.
There's that saying, which is like, are you climbing the ladder because you want to get to the top because that's where you want to go, or are you climbing because it was put in front of you?
Right.
I think that's the big thing, right? If you want to get to where that ladder takes you, yeah, climb that ladder faster.
Right.
But if it's just this continuation from like high school to college and then getting married and then buying a house and then getting promoted to this thing as quickly as possible, like you're laying these train tracks down and, trying to get there as quickly as possible, you may be disappointed by the destination.
And like everybody, including young people that are super ambitious, everybody understands that nobody says on their deathbed they wish they worked more. But if everybody understood that, just like everybody understands, money doesn't buy happiness. Why is everybody after these two things that everybody understands is not the ultimate good that they should be chasing after? I think, like you say, part of it is because the car is driving away and you like want to catch the car. Like part of it is like this urge, like, right? It's just a feeling that one has.
So you think major disruption is coming to the world due to AI? Which jobs are safe and which jobs are not safe when it comes to AI?
Yeah. And I read so many articles about this. I honestly think most people are wrong about all this because the articles you read now are things like, go choose the majors that humans really matter in. Like some people say things like, oh, it turns out you should be a plumber, actually. Like work with your hands, be a machinist, right? I think all of that is misguided. And the reason I think all of that is misguided is if you think back to when first Deep Blue, I think, beat Garry Kasparov, right? And people back then said, oh yeah, but chess is easy. Think about Go. Go is unbeatable. If I went to chess players back then and said, don't worry about your jobs, retrain and Go because computers will never beat Go. That was the popular consensus, right? Because it was impossible. Every move in Go has something like 200 possible moves, right? So the combinatorics are ridiculous. But it turns out people were wrong, right? So I think the same type of person today who says, go be a machinist, do stuff with your hands, be a psychiatrist, like talk to people. People need people, right? It turns out that surveys of young people show that they prefer AI psychiatry or therapy to normal people, because they feel like the AI won't judge them. And so there are many things that I think I hear now about working with your hands that presume that just because LLMs were the first big one to come along and they're very good at language, that non-language things are somehow impossible the way that Go seemed impossible. I think plumbing might be just a few years behind. In which case you're telling a young person now, go into plumbing. I think that might be a disaster. So back to your core question of like, then what do I recommend? I feel like right now, anybody recommending any specific thing probably has no real insight into what will happen because the world is changing in such a dramatic way. As a small example, AI researchers are regularly surprised by the output of models they themselves built. AI to me is much more of a discovery, not an invention. An invention, you should never be surprised what it does. You designed it to do the thing you invented it to do. It does that. Discoveries surprise us all the time. If even the world's best AI researchers are regularly and often surprised by this thing, how well can the average lay journalist writing for Business Week guess what the most popular or Harvard, business school, right? That like these jobs are safe. I feel like all of that is conjecture and probably most of that as well.
I'd like to take a second to share a feature from our season sponsor, Linear. A couple of weeks back, I shared Linear's integration with Cursor, which gives you a coding agent that operates within the context of your code base and all of your plans and issues that sit in Linear. They've recently launched a similar agent with GitHub Copilot. If you're using GitHub Copilot already, you can now work with the agent directly within Linear. It's super simple to use. It functions just like how you would interact with a teammate in Linear. All you do is mention GitHub Copilot on any issue, like a feature idea or bug, and you can ask the agent to start an implementation in a draft PR. Because it operates in Linear, it has the full context of your plans, backlog, and projects. And then, of course, because it's a GitHub agent, it has the full context of your code repositories. All that context makes it so much more successful at drafting a PR that you actually want to merge. Teams are already using it to handle lightweight tasks in your backlog, like quick bug fixes, small refactors, or UI polish. You know, those small things that always get deprioritized. Head to linear.app/agents to learn more and get 5 seats on Linear Business free for 6 months by heading to linear.app/ALE.
My mental model for LLMs is less that we've built something like with, imperial languages, like a bunch of if-then statements, and more like the mental model is we set up a bunch of lights and then we planted a seed and then a plant sort of emerged. We don't really understand what's going on with the plant. It's not a big surprise that is surprising us. I think Andrej Karpathy on Dwarkesh podcast was basically like, we're not building another animal. We're kind of making these digital ghosts that are trained on all of the text on the internet. And so, yeah, I do think that it is surprising. I do think that there's a lot of things that we're not going to expect. And, interpretability is a really big sort of topic that's going on. I don't see the dotted line or the through line to like a robotic plumber.
Right. Yeah.
Because I don't think we're getting a plumber through LLMs. I don't think you can take the internet text that's out there and then all of a sudden fit a pipe. Not that I don't know why plumbing is the job that everybody uses, but even simple things for humans. Like during the pandemic, I was like, oh, I should try to make a shirt. Turns out that's like really hard. Right. And so I do agree with you. I was in high school in the late 90s when Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov, and they were saying the things about Go. I think Go's on a 19 by 19 board. And the combinatorial explosion, people are like, oh, we might, in our lifetime, never have a robot or never have a machine or a software that would play Go. And obviously, that's not true. After the advent of things like reinforcement learning and DeepMind, I think, from Google, if you just think about the internet in the late 90s, early 2000s, we did not have a conception of the internet that sort of matches today. It didn't unfold in front of us. I didn't know that I was never going to hail a taxi again. I didn't think that people would meet their next husband or wife on the internet, or that a package would miraculously show up on my doorstep like hours after I'd ordered batteries from Amazon. And so I completely agree with you. I think if anybody is going to think about the future and make a bold prediction, they are almost always going to be wrong. Will companies do more with less, or companies do more with more?
I think when I debate friends of mine, many of my friends are the EAC-ish sort of person that's like, yeah, full speed ahead, no problems. To your point of the speed of displacement, I'm first very concerned about social instability due to it. In the 1910s, right, America had 40% farmers. Now we have about 4 or less percent. But the key is we never told any single farmer, stop farming, become a social media director, right? What we told the farmer's son is go to college. That's what we did, right? And so 2 generations later, you have the farmer's grandkid doing like social media direction at some big media company. The difference now is we are telling people in their current jobs. I have a friend from high school who's a professional voice actor for big games like Blizzard games. And she called me and she was very concerned. And she said, well, what happens to my job? And I had to tell her, in all honesty, I think your job is going away, and I think it's going to happen within the next few years. And she was so sort of distraught by this because she said, well, this is what I've spent my entire adult life doing. I love this work. And that's what I think is both sad about it. I will not be sad at all when Amazon uses robots to replace human beings to lift these things, because I have done the job myself, and that is hard work. And my hope is that humans don't have to use that as their labor means, right? But for someone who's a voice actor, she might love the work. We're going to displace those people too. So I think part A is we have to be much more ready to adapt society's legal structures, regulatory, everything to be ready for that. Now, to your other question, will companies do more or less? The skeptics who debate me, they often say, well, you're such a Luddite, Philip, like humanity has predicted the end of jobs forever and ever, and they've always been 100% wrong. And I agree. I admit that empirically, the facts are that I am once again saying a thing that people have been 100% wrong on in the past. But I'm also self-aware enough to know it sounds ridiculous when I say this time is different. But I do believe this time is different. And here's why, which is when we told the farmer's son to go to college and their grandkid to become a social media director, most people have the intellectual capability to do that and can do it better than a computer can. And so there you go. Once computers can do a lot of our jobs well, better than we can, and they are general purpose enough such that we can't easily retrain into yet another field the computer hasn't done, I think there will be a subset of people we will have to say, unfortunately, commercially, your output to our society cannot beat a computer at anything you are capable of doing. I think that's why this time is different, is because we no longer have that. What I think companies will do, many people will say, like, especially companies like take Uber, they're in a tough position. Like, you don't want the CEO of Uber out there constantly saying they want to replace human drivers. That would be difficult given their current employee force. But if you owned Uber, that's pretty motivating. That's a pretty clear goal for the long run, right? So I think any company CEO right now who stands to benefit from AI automation reducing staff will, of course, want to espouse the position. We wouldn't lay off staff. We can't hire enough people right now. We would do far more with our staff. I think that's only half true, because here's the other part. You're probably well familiar in software circles with the mythical man month, right? The idea of like, you don't just double your workforce and get double the output. You get like 1.4 times the output. And the reason is human coordination, all the meetings, all the stand-ups, all the required HR, watch our security, HIPAA video or whatever. These things make it so that doubling your workforce doesn't double the output. So you could either keep, let's say Microsoft at today's 20,000 people. You can either have those people output 440,000 people's worth of work with the mythical man month overhead of all the meetings. And I worked at Microsoft for 12 years. There are a lot of meetings, right? Or you could do what a guy named Mini Microsoft 20 years ago kept saying, which is reduce the workforce in half, get more done. I think that might literally happen, which is you cut your workforce in half, it reduces all the scrums, all the whatever, and you AI empower them. They do more than the original 220,000 people. So I do think that while a company might have the appetite to absorb an endless amount of expansion into all sorts of different worlds, like a Berkshire Hathaway, they might get into insulation or Dairy Queen. I think most smart CEOs will say, no, there's actually an optimum. If we chop down to a quarter of the people we have, our per capita earnings, right, and per employee earnings is going to be much higher.
So you're saying definitely more with less.
I feel like, yes, companies will willingly do that because the percentage of time every employee spends doing useful things is much, much higher.
Well, I think that's interesting because, like, what's the differentiation then? Like, what's the moat that Microsoft would have? Like, it seems to me that if you have a really large, unwieldy company, think the Microsofts and the Amazons of the world, and you start to reduce the labor costs, and then you're doing more with less, what's the difference between that and the barrier to entry for a smaller company who doesn't have to hire staff now, who has access to the same agents, the same software, the same AI? Where's the competitive advantage for the big companies?
Yeah, there isn't one. I think we are rapidly approaching a world. Like 2 years ago, someone could write Flappy Bird with like vibe coding, right? We're about to get into a world where you could probably write half of the apps on the App Store with vibe coding, right? So we're about to get into a world where the moats are far smaller unless you are rent seeking. Like our nation's ability to support rent seeking is huge. And so rent seeking companies abound in our country. Those companies will do fine. But if you are trying to keep a company based on innovation, based on market competition, you out competing people, things are about to get a lot more turbulent because 3 people in a garage can do it, right? I was at Facebook when everybody had a global freak out about Google Plus coming, right? Back then, Facebook was probably, a 30th the size of Google? Facebook's infrastructure back then was immature compared to now. Now the infrastructure is amazing. Back then it was terrible. At a time when Big Table was already well established, all sorts of, yeah. So like you think about the average employee at Facebook rightfully being freaked out that a company 30 times the size, that's much more profitable, that has much more stable infrastructure, has now goaled everyone in the company on G plus contributions as part of their bonus. Okay, so you have everything aligned to beat Facebook, but just couldn't help but trip over themselves and essentially, through the weight of their own organization, collapse under it and be unable to compete. I think this is why many people would choose to reduce, because they can see that they can outmaneuver the other side. I think small size will be an increasing advantage, and that disruptions will greatly increase because everybody can soon vibe code themselves half the apps on the App Store.
Suppose I agree with your thesis around major disruption and, the lack of moats, and now everybody can, maybe I can say, hey, code me up in Netflix and it works somehow. Where's the value creation? It seems like we're with efficiency. If your argument is in terms of efficiency, we're doing more with less. It seems like you're just displacing the value. Like there's not going to be an increase in GDP, right? It's just going to be shifted from one place to another place. And so is it just that it's a big game of musical chairs, shifting from larger companies to smaller organizations? Or is it going to be, say, like the cloud, where the cloud business is much larger than, say, the on-prem business, right? And so like the GDP, there's a ton of value creation there.
Yeah, totally. I think the GDP and all that value creation will actually go greatly up, because the barriers to entry for people who have ideas, who used to be kept out by gatekeepers, either whether that's capital gatekeeping or like just organizational gatekeeping because you're a junior guy with some crazy idea, right? Those ideas will now get released. I have a friend who quit Microsoft, and his full-time work himself now is he's producing a little game, right? And he's using Unity and all the classic tools. But traditionally, he would have had to hire design artists for the opening logo splash screen for all of that. He's doing all of it through AI. Now, will that beat like Blizzard's art? No way, right? This is not like first class art. But is it good enough for one man in his garage to release an app on the App Store that might charge you 99 cents, Yes, definitely. So I think a game that 2 years ago would never get made now gets made. Now, if his game sells any at all, that's value creation, right? So I think a lot of the value creation comes not from rent-seeking, classic like aggregation of rent, right? But through new ideas being unblocked to come loose.
Let's talk about the innovator's dilemma when applied personally with the pace of change. What's going to get disrupted?
I feel like everybody understands the corporate version of this, right? But I think very few people apply it to their own lives, which is like, it's the classic who moved my cheese sort of problem, right? Back to your question of like, what does a person do with all this change coming if we can't even guarantee which jobs are stable? I think the people who survive are the ones who swim faster as the tide rises, and the ones who are very willing to adapt and change. I think the type of person who embraces that, hey, I'm not going to be able to stop the tide, I'm going to surf on the tide, that sort of person I think will make it. So mapping back to your original question, I think a person who really disrupts themselves before the world disrupts them is going to be the one who actually survives this.
The voice actor friend, is that what you told her?
What I told her is she has a pretty set of tough decisions. One decision being, do you unionize with most of the voice actors that are now saying, hey, let's all collectively refuse to give our voices to these things? I don't know if that'll work. If everybody unionizes, then presumably it does work, right? But as we know, it takes 3 scabs to blow this thing wide open, right? Like, you do not need 1,000 voice actors in order to make the world work. You only need 5 people with great voices and a bunch of modifications for all the AAA titles to be fine, right? So I don't honestly know the answer to that. Like, could the answer be, and I'm not saying that it is, but could the answer be that if you are in the top 5% of voices, you will make far more than you ever did before? Think about Taylor Swift, Rihanna on Spotify. Because of Spotify's distribution and the size of market they bring, the top musicians make more than they have ever made in their whole lives. Everybody else can't make a living now. When you used to be the town's best bard, 400-person town, you play in the local whatever town pub, right? That was fine enough, right? You were the town's prettiest woman. Okay, well, you've got a job modeling or whatever it is, right? These days, you got to be prettier than like the rest of this state to make it anywhere. You have to sing better than Rihanna to make it anywhere, to actually make a living on Spotify. I think the same thing will happen to voice acting. If you're Scarlett Johansson, no problem. Like you can license your voice and make more money with your voice than you were ever able to before, reading audiobooks, doing games, whatever. Everybody else is not going to make a living doing it.
Think about all of the coders that are there. I feel like a lot of the Anthropics, the OpenAIs, they're really focusing on replacing developers with AIs, with LLMs. What advice do you have to a software developer? Is it still just run fast and try to surf on this thing? Or are they sort of in the same boat as the voice actor friend of yours?
I think for the best software developers, they will make more money than they've ever made before for the same reason. You think about the number of people at OpenAI when I joined was about 120 developers, I think, in total, producing a lot of market value, arguably, right? And so the amount you're willing to pay each person is very high because you can afford it. As the top developers get even more powerful, they will produce, back to your point about value creation, they will create far more value than they were able to before. But I think everybody else won't have a job, or at least will not have a job that's compensated the way it is today. So I think my advice to most people is if you really can become in the top 10%, those people I think will always have jobs. They'll be paid far more than they ever were paid before. If you're not in the top 10%, I think it's time to have a deep think on, can you live on less, for instance? Because jobs will still pay. It just won't pay as much, right? And so can you live on less? Do you want to retrain into something else? Is there something you can specialize in that you are top 10% on?
It sounds to me like you're saying, okay, well, there's a nice normal distribution of salaries right now, and it's just going to be something where the top 1% are going to get paid a ton of money, and then everybody else is essentially not going to get paid anything. Like a basketball sort of thing.
Yes. Yeah. Great comparison, which is if you want to be a basketball coach for your local high school, no problem. You'll make a living. You're just not going to be LeBron. Like you cannot expect to make millions of dollars with your non-top 0.1% performance, right? And if you are a top 0.1% performer, people forget when Michael Jordan signed with Nike. Nike was not the preferred label to sign with. It was like Adidas or something like this, right? And back then, a person being paid $20,000 for a deal with sneakers would be considered like you got a pretty good deal, right? And so what happened is with television and with advertising budgets, aggregation of eyeballs, Michael Jordan's face became a lot more valuable than $20,000. I think the same thing is going to happen with coders. You're going to have the equivalent of like NBA level coders that are recruited out of high school. You know what I mean? And like,
it's the meta thing, right? Like $100 million or $20 million to like sign with these folks.
It sounds ridiculous to people only when they don't consider the head-tail dynamics that's going to apply to all of humanity.
What about the other 99% of people, right? Are they all in the same voice actor group? I mean, only so many people, by definition, can be in this top 1%, top 0.1%.
Absolutely. And this is why I'm worried, because I worry that I'm American and I live in the US, right? So I mostly think about American laws. I think America is fairly good at responding post-fact as to what we need to do to change a law to, stop some bad thing from happening. I think traditionally America has been very bad at predicting what might happen and legislating beforehand to make sure it happens well. Someone recently said something really smart, which is like, hey, when you bought a robot that replaces you on the Amazon line, you get to collect its paycheck. That's awesome. How would you feel if your boss at Amazon bought that robot? The outcome is very different. Mm-hmm. But the world has the same thing. One robot did one man's work on one line, produced the same value. But the outcome to you, between you buying that robot and your boss buying that robot, is a world of difference. And right now, we are heading toward the boss buys the robot. That is what is happening in every case, is people aren't talking about if we replaced, Amazon has about 1 million workers right now, right? If we replaced half of them with robots, that itself is not a bad thing. I did the work. It's hard work. I had to help a 65-year-old man lift like a 40-pound box because he couldn't do it, right? I would like him to not have to do that. But if my answer to him is, you get no paycheck, you don't have to do it, congratulations, versus, hey, here's a robot that'll replace you, and we're going to give you a cut of the robot's output, so you don't have to lift this box. I think we need to aim for the latter outcome, but I'm frankly unsure our country has the wherewithal to put that together before massive displacement causes huge unrest, maybe even revolution.
Is there any good news?
Yeah.
With AI?
Yeah. I feel like there's so much. So sorry, I've been so pessimistic, but let me paint the optimist view because I'm in general quite optimistic. For one, you take a look at education alone. My son used ChatGPT for the last 2 years of his high school He learns so many things. It's like a talking version of Wikipedia, right? And so you can self-teach yourself. You think about any child who is from a single parent family home where their parent might not be able to help them through their homework. Or their school is so low funded, right? That the teacher might be mostly dealing with behavioral things, not actually the content, right? That child now can for free get an infinitely patient tutor, right? That's incredible. You think about the things that might happen in health. You know, these crazy discoveries people are making now, like proteins. Oh, look at this protein, right? I feel like that's only going to get faster. So the types of global health problems we can solve with it, the types of poverty-related, education-related, infrastructure-related problems, it'll be amazing. Like if it's all shunted in the right way, it's about the bounty and the spread, right? The AI is about to make the bounty unbelievable, the bounty to the world, okay? It's a question of spread, right? Is like, can we get the bounty in a way that most of humanity benefits from the spread of the bounty? Or are we going to have a problem with like 3 people in the world own everything, you know, and then everybody else is like Ready Player One-ing, you know, in their the beat up apartment on VR?
I want the Star Trek future where there's replicators and, you know, you express yourself through art or whatever you'd like to do, or you go explore like the universe, right? But your basic needs are all sort of taken care of. I worry if the change goes too quickly, we invent the replicator and then like Elon just gets richer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
How do we like get towards the awesome utopian future and not the one where it's like Ready Player One or Star Wars or whatever, where it's sort of dystopian?
I feel like part of it is we need to start debating as a society, but then establishing proactive rules of like when robots come to replace us. Is it literally the man who bought the robot keeps all the money and then everybody else gets pink slipped home, right? Or do we say like, let's not do that? My problem with the people who say the world should have no billionaires is people so quickly forget that capitalism is an empiric study that has been run many, many times in the last century. There's a reason why people want to come to America. There's a reason why every socialist society has not succeeded. There's a reason why China is doing so well now after private ownership became possible. You know what I'm saying? So like, I don't want to kill the golden goose, but I also don't want to dial it to 11 toward the libertarian view that sort of it's fine for people to gather, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. We have to find an equitable thing where we do not hobble the creatives in our society from creating even more value for us. But we do not say 100% of that value creation accrues to that person only or their firm only. We need to have some form of saying like, hey, like everybody's got to eat. I'll end on this thought, which is there used to be, I think there's phrase in the Bible somewhere. Someone said like, he who does not work shall not eat. That for most of human society aligned incentives very well, which is when our town's not going to stomach you sitting there playing, you know, video games all day, right? Like we need you to contribute something. That ethic only works if every person who is willing to work can work, meaning like can be compensated for what they are able to do. At our local grocery chain, there's a guy with Down syndrome that bags the groceries. And I love getting in that line because I feel like it's so beautiful that this man is doing something that our society values him for and that we include him in this thing. Do I expect him to beat like Elon Musk on some great idea of whatever? No, right? But our society should have an ethic of like, even this person deserves a job he can be respected in and deserves to eat, right? What if we eventually, to the AI, we will all seem like super unintelligent people? We'll all seem super unintelligent. And then the question is, do we want to say only the most elite of intellects deserve to eat in this country? Or can we all like actually still participate even though we can't contribute commercial value?
You continue to employ a software engineer even though you say he could be replaced with AI. Why do you do that?
I had a great conversation. I work with a Brazilian software developer who is great. I really love working with him. He is less experienced than I am. And in the past year, we've been building our podcast player, Superphonic, together. It's been a lot of fun working with him. But I had a conversation with him just last month where I said, look, I love working with you, but if I'm honest, if all I cared about was money, like AI has now tipped to a point where hiring you does not make financial sense. And the reason I had this conversation with him is I told him, look, you have to embrace AI and study the crap out of all the LLMs. You got to use the tools all the time. You got to become very good at AI. Because if it wasn't me just liking your companionship working with me as a coworker, brainstorming and all that, this is not financially going to work for you job-wise, right? So I wanted him to embrace it so that he rises above the rising tide, basically. But one thing I love about working with him is it is sincerely a real joy to have a coworker. Like, you have an idea, you want to bat it around, like, you, right? When there's a hot fix going out, it's like, oh no, we had this big fire, we got to do, right? If you do that all yourself, which is the vision of many vibe coders, is like, oh, I can be my one-man show, I'm going to blah, 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 right? I think after a few months of that, you're going to realize, actually, no, like, there's a real value in at least having 2 people, maybe 3 people, right? So I feel like the thing I value about my Brazilian coworker, I hope more of humanity comes around to that side of it, which is I will employ you even though a robot will do the same job for cheaper because I enjoy working with you. That there's a human thing to this that is in itself valuable. And I hope we get there, not the way we got to the fancy Peruvian rugs or whatever for $4,000, which is like really wealthy people want to know that a human has like hand labored over something difficult, right? I'm hoping we get into it more from a feeling of camaraderie, of mutual sort of like appreciation, right? Like slow food, right? You're willing to pay a little bit more for the principle that it's like local farmers producing these things, it's fresh, all that stuff. You're willing, fair trade coffee. We need some concept for like, not fair trade human, but like some form of like, hey, you're deliberately paying 15% more for this because a human being is doing this work and you value their dignity and you value what they contribute to society, right? I think we need something like that. Or else it's like bargain basement, lowest wages possible. Everything goes to the floor because AI replaces everything.
Let's transition over to software development because I guess that's what we do. So which company has the better engineering culture, Meta or OpenAI?
This is a tough question because the companies also evolve very quickly. So for instance, when I joined Meta, it was 500 engineers globally. It had one office in Palo Alto back then. Now Meta has, I'm guessing, maybe 80, 90,000 people, like somewhere on the tens of thousands, right? The culture is going to be different no matter what you do from that size to that size. So one thing is big company versus small companies just have differences. Another is engineering culture. When I joined Facebook, it was move fast and break things. And as much as VPs and stuff want to backpedal on that later, because it sounds terrible to people to say you're going to break their stuff. Nobody wants to hear that. But there was a positive part of the ethic that people who didn't work there really don't realize was tremendously motivating, which is this idea of like, get the right thing out there as soon as possible. If your thing is somewhat buggy, but it gives great value to users, they'll deal with the bugs. Because they want the value, right? That's what, to me, move fast and break things was let me give you something so valuable, much faster than someone else, like Google back then. Let me give it to you much faster, and we'll try to fix the other things along the way, but the value add is going to be so huge that you're going to like go with it for a while. So I very much valued that part of Facebook, and I think as part of running a successful company, everybody had to disavow that later. But I think that there was a core that was magic about that. OpenAI, I would say, when I joined, one thing that I loved is so many coworkers genuinely like believed in the positive that it could be to human beings. At least most of the coworkers I worked with didn't say like, oh, I'm here because of the sweet, sweet mun, right? Like most of the people said, this is an amazing thing. We might be the first species in the universe to create something smarter than ourselves. Evolutionarily, that's a very weird thing, right? And so those people, the people I worked with, love the idea of the plenty, right? Of like education, like all these things, health. It could all be better. And this stuff can just like, we should get it out there to as many people as soon as possible. So I love like that sense of mission, I guess, a positive sense of mission that I felt at OpenAI. I can't speak to either of these companies because now I've left each of them for long enough that I think with growth, with advancements, these things can all change. But that was my sense of the best parts of their culture when I joined them.
So this is a question from my Discord, which is, how important is it to work on AI projects versus regular projects now in this world of AI, both in terms of your skills growth, but also for your resume?
My sense is that there are very dangerous AI projects to work on because most companies now, like let's say you're Walmart. I have not kept up with Walmart at all. But I'm willing to bet that their CEO probably has to say AI something, something at the next, corporate whatever, right? But the problem is when every company, including a like retail seller, needs to have an AI plan, I bet 90% of those projects are actually crap, right? And so would I recommend people go work on that? No, it's like, it's probably not a great use of your time, right? But I would say for myself personally, now that I see how effective AI can make me in my work, from now on, will refuse to work for an employer that doesn't let me use AI. And that's more because I would know that the opportunity cost of my time being spent in that labor is such wasted time. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to spend my life being that inefficient, even if I'm paid for it. Right. So I do think that it's important for people to join employers that allow them to use AI. I do think 5 years from now, if you come from a background where your employer, I'm going to make one up, like the Department of Defense or whatever it is, has refused to let you use it for whatever reasons, right? I think you're doing yourself a disservice. Back to the innovator's dilemma applied to yourself question. I think you will be disrupted out of a job if everybody else knows how to use these LLMs and you're like the one developer that doesn't know how to use it. I think that's a big problem.
I had somebody on the podcast a couple of months ago, Casey Muratori, and I had asked him about AI, and he also comes from sort of a games background, and he's really into performance and sort of like rolling your own everything. And I asked him about AI, and he's like, that is just so uninteresting to me.
Yeah.
You know, I was just blown away. I'm just like, well, it can like do like your boilerplate, at least it'll like serve you up, you know, all of the code. And then you can just fill in the parts that are important to you or that it's not good at. And he's like, but I code because I want to, right?
We have to separate in our minds. What is the most commercially productive thing you can do with your brain when it comes to code versus what do you enjoy spending time doing? Right now, I am hyper productive with AI, much more so than without. But a lot of my day is spent reviewing AI's subpar code. I don't like code reviews. Nobody likes code reviews. But I have turned myself into a code review machine, okay? Whereas I used to write all my own code, right? So, but I know I'm slow with the writing. So now I have this problem that I know people will not pay me to handwrite my own code because I love the craft, right? People want me to produce as much output as possible for the salary they pay me. And I think that's only fair. But my job will suck relative to how it used to, right? Now I'm going to basically be reviewing subpar code the whole day. So I do think that what you mentioned is a profound thing we should keep an eye on, which is the same reason why some people whittle, right? Nobody who whittles has any illusions that a machine, he does it better than a machine. I'm like, look at this.
You're talking about like a knife on a stick.
Yes, on a piece of wood, right? Whittling, right?
Okay.
Yeah. But the people who do that, they do it because the joy of the actual creation is what they're going for. They are not deceiving themselves about how well they do it. They don't think they can produce it faster than any machine, and nobody's going to pay him for that.
I do think that makes sense, but it seems like right now, you know, there's this concept of like swarm coding or like these agents that are super intelligent, but, you know, are still interns and you kind of have to pull them back in. And so like now the abstraction is that, you know, nobody's a 10x coder right now because you can just get 10 agents. But everybody, like the skill that is difficult for the AI is sort of being like a team lead. It seems to me like I have seen a project fail so many different ways.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of embedded in, you know, the way that I go about software. And so when I unleash a team of agents on a project, they all fail in a way that I'm very familiar with.
Yeah.
You know, like what if that is the mode that we're in with AI, where everybody's now a manager or a team lead, whether it's software or something else. You know, I've heard the saying that it's not going to be an AI that replaces you. It's going to be a human with an AI that ends up replacing you. Do you think that that's just a temporary situation where the AI and human in the loop is superior to an AI on its own or a human on its own? Or do you think that it's just an inevitability that the AI will also learn how to be an effective team lead to all of the other agents?
I feel like both things are true, that AI will be an effective team lead one day, and there will always be a human in the loop. It's just a question of how exceptional of a human that person is going to be eventually. People forget like 2 years ago, LLMs were complimented for haikus and limericks. We've gone from that to like having PR like feedback for my code, and like some of it is useful. Like people forget the progress we've had in just 18 months. It's like, oh, but I can't do this. Oh, it's so bad at that, right? It is so bad at that. But if you imagine another 18 months, it's going to be incredible. I do agree that right now there's so much missing from it. But I also feel like in a few years, all of that will be solved.
I Still have not seen a funny joke from an LLM. So when it makes me like lol out loud,
Yes.
like that's when I think that, the writing will be on the wall.
Humor is some of the toughest, right? Because humor requires that you have a theory of mind of the listener and that you have such a good theory of mind that you would know what things are funny to them. Funny requires surprise. It requires an innovation or a twist in something. You have to have that complete theory of mind of the other person. I think by the time AI can tell you a real joke, we're in serious trouble because their theory of mind is so good. You know what I mean? Because joking aside, literally, if their theory of mind of you is so good, we have to watch out for manipulation. If they understand you so well, they can make you laugh. They can make you do a lot of other things. Someone famous has recently been comparing to like, it would be silly of us to imagine dogs of the world uniting to like keep humans under control. Let's make sure they always do what dogs want. Let's make sure that we keep them, like they are so transparent to us that to imagine them colluding together to protect themselves from these smart humans that might, do whatever they want to them. I think AI is going to be a similar spot. It's like all this talk about how we're going to contain it. We're going to like put safeguards around it. We're going to be so smart. It's not going to be able to do any of this stuff. I think that's misguided.
I think to my own dogs, I have this corgi. He's kind of a simple dog, very food motivated, always smiling.
Totally.
But we installed this like dog door, and it's this like super fancy, like Wi-Fi enabled dog door with like NFC collars and all this stuff. And we finally got it installed. It's super expensive. And my dog just sat on the other side of the door, and the door just kept on opening and closing. And he's just smiling on the other side until I got a treat.
Right.
And then he finally came in, but then he immediately left. And so he was like playing me. So that's what I think about when, the dogs are sort of taking over. It's like, he can still make me his master for at least one dimension of a thing. You're on team, like it's inevitable, like brace for the singularity, brace for a new like robot overlord.
I think that there are obvious downsides to it. So I definitely don't want to blow sunshine and said that it's only upside, right? If we manage it well, we might have a soft landing. And soft landing meaning we cure cancer, we get like globally alleviate poverty because the education is so good. We have rules-based enforcement of laws and whatnot by robots that are like impartial. You know what I mean? Like there is a sunshine version of this scenario. But I think odds are very good we're going to crash land this thing hard, and that we will learn from mistakes how not to deploy this thing.
You've worked at Microsoft, you've worked at Facebook, you've worked at OpenAI. Was there a company that you ever applied to that rejected you that you wanted to work at?
I have been rejected many times, and funny enough, within those companies, because at least at Microsoft, for instance, when I worked there, I'm not sure if this is still true. If you wanted to switch teams, they would re-interview you with the same number of interviews as an outside person, which I never understood because you have a history of performance reviews from various managers. Like, why wouldn't that be higher signal than your 6-hour interview? But that's how they rolled, okay? So I've been rejected from plenty of jobs like that. I think oftentimes what I try to remind people about rejection of is there can be a host of reasons why you're rejected for a job, including things like a sampling error, like you have a false negative, right, is a very common one. Or you may be good at some things, but the company just doesn't need that thing right now. And so it's not a judgment on you as like you're not hireable. It's like, are you the right peg for this hole? And maybe right now you aren't, So I do think that every time I've been rejected, it has been very disappointing, honestly, because it always feels a little bit also like, well, like, could I have said something different? Part of me feels like a lack of self-confidence when I get rejected because I feel like, well, in theory, I should be great at this job. Like, why would 6 people who talk to me agree that I'm not? Like, what am I not seeing about myself that makes this the case? But I do think rejection is common no matter where you are in the industry and no matter how long you've worked at it.
You've given the advice to insta-sell your RSUs. RSUs are restricted stock units, compensation for a lot of tech employees. And you stated that this advice has cost you many millions of dollars, but you still insist it was the right move. Do you still think so?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think most people do not factor in unrealized risk. Just because you survive one round of Russian roulette doesn't mean pulling the trigger was a smart idea. You know what I mean? Many people view it as it was a smart idea. It was never a smart idea. Even after the fact, it wasn't a smart idea. You know what I mean? Unrealized risk happens to people all the time. And when it's unrealized, they view it as if nothing could have ever happened. I think in my life, I try to price in the unrealized risk all the time. And so I have many friends, most friends, in fact, at Facebook, held their stock for much longer than I have and made a lot more money than I have. And I both congratulate them on their good fortune, but I don't congratulate them on wise investment principles, you know? Like, I am thankful that they made so much because it's a blessing to have that much. So that's awesome. But I do not compliment them on their investing prowess. The reason that I think you should sell it always is the general principle, in my opinion, that if you wouldn't buy that stock today for that amount of money, if you wouldn't take $10,000 out of your savings account to go buy Meta stock today, then you shouldn't hold 10,000. Like, it's, in my mind, an equivalent decision. Modulo, like super techie people will get into like long-term CAC, short-term blah, blah, blah. What if I option the margin on the button? Anybody who has those protests, I'm not talking to them. They already understand so deeply what the deal is that I'm sure they can make the right decision. I'm talking to the average employee that lets it ride like it's house money, right? Like, many people think like, well, it's just like house money. It's like free. It's like $10,000. It's not free. Like, you not selling it is you taking $10,000 of your own money and buying it.
I had Steve Yegi on the podcast, and he told me he could have been a billionaire, right? Because he had, had all of this Amazon stock. He's doing just fine. But I think part of me is just like, does it have to be insta-sell everything? Could you have done insta-sell 50% or insta-sell 75%?
Yeah.
Right? And still like reap the upside. Isn't there an asymmetry there where like you could have reaped a big upside or the downside would be sort of capped?
You can, of course, just sell half or like 2/3 or whatever it is to have the feeling of vicarious participation as your friends make a ton of money, right? So yes, you absolutely can. But I say when you do that, you should sell any shares that you would not have taken money out of your banking account to buy. Let's go back to the $10,000. Why not keep $5,000 in and let it ride? I'd say if you would have taken $5,000 out of your bank account to buy it so that you can vicariously enjoy the growth of the company, then yes, totally rational. But if you would behave differently, whether the money started in your bank account or versus started at Schwab when it vested to you, if you would behave differently, I posit that's irrational, like literally not logical.
Yeah, I think, if you talk to an economist, because I feel like this is the line that you're taking. They're like, oh, you should apply your capital and all of your savings in the most efficient way possible. Therefore, it doesn't make sense to say purchase a house with a mortgage, right? Like, you would just go and do a rent calculator and then, plot everything out and just be like, hey, actually, it makes no sense to purchase a house. You probably, I'm going to bet that you have a house and you have a mortgage against that house. Right.
Totally fair. And thank you for calling me out on the psychological aspect of this. So I'll say two things. One, Warren Buffett has consistently said the biggest financial mistake he's ever made in his life is his Omaha house that he bought in 1965 or whatever for like $180,000 or something. He says biggest financial mistake he's ever made, right? You think about that money compounded until now, it is a ridiculous house, okay? And he still lives in that same house. So I agree. Like, there's that. The other side of it that you're mentioning is very good, which is psychological. Like, I paid off my house for psychological reasons. Yeah. At a time when interest rates were 3% or whatever, I had a 30-year mortgage. In no 30-year period of time in American stock market history, like ever not made out better borrowing money for 3% fixed for 30 years than like cashing it in. The only reason I paid it off is an irrational need to feel like I do not owe the bank money. It was irrational. I fully admit it. So if I were to criticize my own selling the RSUs, I would say a person should understand their own psychology. If you're the type of person where if the guy next to you bet it all on black and he like got a yacht on that and you would feel like you FOMO'd it, right? Then you should keep 100% of it in, Like if that is how you would feel, if a guy who got lucky, if a guy at the roulette table bets it on 3 and then makes 32 times the money back, right? If you feel FOMO from that, you should bet it on 3. Like, that's how you should behave, right? But I think most people might not realize that what they might not take a step back to ask, like, what happens in the case where it doesn't happen? My brother has worked in Silicon Valley for probably 27 years, has been in 7 different startups. Not a single one of them has made it. He was even in Silicon Valley's fastest market cap growing hardware startup of all time, and that didn't make it. So I think that when people see these success cases, they keep imagining them holding the stock and becoming like, oh, I was early in Uber and look what happened, right? They don't imagine them early in pets.com. You know what I'm saying? Like, people just don't see that most things fail, and that if you were to take a bet on something, you should risk mitigate yourself.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of survivorship bias.
Yeah.
I've also heard, okay, well, if one startup's not going to work, if you keep trying at it, eventually you're going to hit one that works out. So I finally have one counterfactual.
and I'm sure if you rolled 50 different startups, like just from an odds perspective, yes, like it's going to work at some point, right? Mm-hmm. So I do think there's validity to that.
I guess, Philip, what's next for you, right? Like you're outside of big tech, you're working on these apps and, just wrote a book as well. Like,
I'm torn between two things. One, I love whittling on my little app. Me and the Brazilian coder, just every day, just coding.
Yeah.
I actually love the feeling of doing that and having a coworker. So I love that. The other side of me feels like this AI thing is such a big thing that is going on that part of me just wants to be part of it. Like part of hopefully the positive side of it, like the bounty that it can bring to humanity, or at least be in the conversation for like, guys, we need to like structure our society in a way that we need to prepare for a hard landing, right? So part of me feels like maybe whittling is almost an indulgence. Like maybe I'm like pleasing myself, but ignoring the fact that this huge tidal wave is coming. So part of me feels like, should I be diving back into the AI space to try to do something positive in it? So I'm honestly torn, not sure.
So Philip, thanks so much for being on the podcast. Let's talk about your app. So it's Superphonic.
Yeah, and it's on iOS. It's a podcast player. You'll probably ask, why does the world need the 48th podcast player? Good question. The two dominant podcast players, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, split about 75% of the market. The third player, which has already been announced as canceled, was Google's podcast player at 3%. Now, you might ask yourself, why would 25% of the market have the number 3 player at 3%? Number 3 should be 12%, 14%, right? If it's a normal market. I posit the answer is because they all suck. Okay. And so let me throw out random things. No podcast player right now allows you to subscribe to a topic instead of a feed. Like no podcast player allows you to easily do real-time reactions in a podcast and figure out where other people have liked it or whatever. Like there's so many things that people have not done. So I wrote it mostly because I listened to podcasts all day. So I wanted the features. And so I built it for myself.
Well, Philip, thanks so much for having a conversation with me. I had a great time and we took the conversation to a bunch of places I didn't think we were going to. So thanks for that.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I enjoyed this tremendously.